Welcome to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. So, as I said many times, here I am, Rosie, and we are a group of friends, students, and young professionals that are just very interested in everything that has to do with the regulation of the tech sector. And today, as well, I'm joined by an amazing group of people, amongst which the most important is Dr. Fotios Fitsilis, who is a parliamentary researcher and the head of documentation at the Hellenic Parliament. So welcome to us, Dr. Fitsilis. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rosie. The pleasure is all mine.
Thank you. And I am also joined by my two colleagues, Giacomo and Giacomo, today very easy for me to pronounce as well. So welcome, guys.
Welcome. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So let me start with the first question for Dr. Fitsilis. Dr. Fitsilis, your career spans between law, economics, engineering even, which is amazing. How do you think that these three disciplines have made an impact upon your perspective of digital policies and how the technological sector is governed?
Well, that's a very important question, and I had exactly this in mind. When I was a younger student, I was being told by professors and other fellow students, older ones, yeah, you need to constantly learn to evolve because the future is unknown, and also your positions and challenges that you will have in your professional life will be very diverse. So you need to be able to adjust. So I think I did exactly this. I mean, to cut the long story short, this path. So I studied engineering, I studied economics, and I also did a master's in an LLM in international law. This is not by chance, but reflects actually also my professional development. I won't take too long of your time, but kindly note that today's environment in a legislative body, in a parliament, is very complex. Of course, there's a lot of room for very specialized individuals, professionals, lawyers, constitutional lawyers, economists. We have budgetary budget offices, and also engineers. We have nowadays organizations, big organizations with a lot of IT systems, and we have very comprehensive ICT departments. So we need people from all sectors. And since I am in the research sector, I'm in the scientific service in the Hellenic Parliament, I needed, over the course of the last 70 years, I am honored to be in this position. I needed to be able to tackle the very different challenges that parliaments have to offer. And nowadays, we have a lot of new technological developments that we will discuss in the following. And apparently, all this background, all this information comes handy as um, what was perceived 20 or 30 years to be, more importantly, to be a very specialized professional to be successful. I think at least in the parliamentary sector, we start need people that are very diverse, that have a lot of, that know a lot of aspects of how the system works, so political aspects, engineering aspects, and even social aspects. So we need people that are in the ancient Aristotle sense, that are really knowledgeable about the entirety of sciences, if possible.
Thank you very much. I see a question from the board.
Yeah, we're we are actually very curious about your work that you're doing. So we would like to ask you if you can share with us what you and your team has contributed making parliamentary data more accessible, and also what are the implications for this legislative transparency?
Oh, thank you very much for this very, very precise question. Of course, as a professional that is a few years around, so there's a lot of things that happened throughout these years. So one of the most important triggers for uh, for for us to evolve as professionals within the parliament was uh, when we figured out that the material that we put online is actually not so accessible and open as we perceived it to be. I mean, openness in the sense of the actual IT definition of openness. You might recall the five-star opening definition. Open data definition. You might want to Google this. So from the moment I mean, as a head of documentation in the parliament, that we realized, okay, so we might put a lot of data there because parliament is all about openness. That's rather obvious. Uh, but we had an issue of accessibility. So what is the use of putting everything online if nobody can find the right information in a timely manner and maybe in the right format? So what is the sense of all this? So from that moment, and this was maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, we started, of course, not alone, with a lot of colleagues to think how can we possibly try to transform all this data and potentially lead to systems or to databases that are really accessible and useful to the for the public or for any interested organization, research institution out there. And this obviously involves the use of standards, very important, the use of well-defined and uh, and uh, and um, um, configurable systems, ICT systems, and also, but not least, the definition of data structures, of ontologies, of processes through which these materials, this data is being produced. So, as a matter of fact, when dealing with data, you deal with the actual nature of the organization, because the parliament, this is what it does. It produces data. Well, it's even if it's voice, it can be transformed into text. So, if you take it very, very uh, uh, if you take it this way, you can say uh, if you have text, you have almost everything that you need to know about parliamentary procedures and proceedings. So so it came as a natural evolution that we started discussing, analyzing, processing, structuring parliamentary discourse to produce as an outcome open, accessible, structured, big parliamentary data.
Wow. Um, it's incredible to hear you speaking about it. The knowledge and the level of detail that you can actually deliver and provide our listeners with is absolutely uh, incredible. It's a real honor for us to be here. And I can see, I'm so sorry, but I can see another question from the board. Please.
Yeah, it's always for me. And yeah, it's super interesting. And you said that it was like a super precise question. So we're gonna be even more precise now. We would like to know most about the use of AI. You wrote a paper that is called Using Artificial Intelligence in Parliament, the Hellenic Case, that highlights the relevance and the prioritization of AI-based technologies in the Parliament. So from the applications of AI that you investigate in this paper, which ones do you think hold the most transformative, potential for the parliamentary work in the, let's say, in the short term?
For answering this question, I think we need to take a step back. So, what was the reason for doing this investigation? And this again, it takes us back maybe in early 2015 or 16, if I recall correctly, but let's say around 10 years ago. So we were doing this work with data. We had already started, and I mean, we did not fell from the sky and starting doing this. I mean, there is a big um, volume of research already was back then already available. So we started studying this and starting getting cleverer. We started discussing with other peers in other parliaments, what do they do? So it was an evolving process. I mean, I studied my basic background is ICT engineer. Okay, so since I have been working with data, it was rather natural to think, okay, we now start to have, and we will. I mean, if you think linearly in the future, we will have at some point a lot of data. So what can we do with that? I mean, of course, you can structure them and they can sit around, accessible, beautifully preservable, archivable. But okay, it's sitting there. And this is also the role of the documentation to describe them, to structure them, and then to place them nicely in repositories so that everybody can see that and access this and for their own merit and work. But isn't it a little bit, I mean, isn't it obvious that if you have all this data, that it's very appealing to start working with that? And how, and yeah, to learn more about the organization, about the processes, about the history, the political history of the institution, of your country, and of Europe, since we have this debates that are referring to the Europe as a whole. And I don't want to expand further on this. So what's the possible? So the logical link then was with my team to say, okay, what are the technologies out there that can deal with that much data? We don't talk about, I mean, 100 or 1,000 pages or even 10,000 pages. We talk about millions of pages of data. Or billions of tokens if we talk in AI jargon. So what are you possibly to do? And this came maybe as a natural process that we say, okay, we need to somehow utilize artificial intelligence. Of course, I took now a very long path to answer your question. And the thing was that this evolved very early. And back then, there was no generative AI, not even GPT-1. There were, of course, other types of machine learning technologies, natural language processing technologies that were very established. And you need to know that our team had also very accomplished professionals in these disciplines. So we were quite aware that what was out there and what were the possibilities. So we started using that, but in a very, let's say, from today's perspective, very careful and maybe primitive way. These technologies and we did some quite interesting publications back then. But at the same time, I asked myself and to my colleagues, okay, now you have data and you have the output of your organization, it's data, right? You have that. And you have the technology. So what is this now? Is this only useful for this technology or technologies are only useful for the output of your organization? Can we somehow use these powerful tools to modify or transform other aspects of the organization? And for this reason, we started making this was an internal process with some colleagues, 3 colleagues specifically. We did a brainstorming, an intensive brainstorming. I think it was over a course of 2 weeks back in 2020. So we did a thorough brainstorming, and uh, we broke down the parliamentary workings in 9 sectors, and we tried to figure out what kind of AI-based technology can be possibly applied to each one of these sectors. And you know what came out? It came out that we could use, at least from the perspective back then, artificial intelligence to for 210 applications of that can be used in Parliament. Now, this is just a number, right? So if we continue elaborating, we can break this down further in 365, or you can group some. Of course, there are certain overlaps. You can group some action, and you can have 62 overall applications. But the essence was that we decided, for the first time it was done this in a parliament. It might have been done in businesses or other organizations, but we did it for the first time in the parliament. We broke down the system into dozens or even hundreds of possible applications, so that everybody could see, okay, we have now AI, which is not a single technology. I want to highlight this. AI can be a lot of technologies, and it is a lot of algorithms, a lot of different types of technologies. And we did a long list. And now the final part, and that's to answer your question finally, was of course this is a brainstorming of a couple of guys who did a long list. How can you directly link this to the parliament? So we did the following. We built focus groups within parliaments, actual parliamentary employees, and aides of MPs, and parliamentary researchers. 15 to 20 people for each parliament. And we did an experiment. If you wish, you can call it an interactive experiment. We did a matching through focus groups of this long list of 210 potential applications in parliaments with actual parliaments. And we did it for 3 parliaments. We did it for the Hellenic Parliament, quite obviously. We did it in 2021, or was it 2? Maybe it was in 2022. Okay. We did it for the Argentinian Federal Parliament, and we did it for the Canadian Federal Parliament. So, and we have evaluated, of course, the results individually, and we did also in comparative analysis. All this is published. And well, as no surprise, it comes that each parliament prioritizes its own sectors and its own procedures. So there was little overlap, or let's say little similarity between the 3 parliaments. And there might be a lot of reasons for that, but this is another scientific or research question.
Thank you for your answer. I was just wondering, this just came up to my mind. You talked about a small group with two of your colleagues, then some focus groups with parliamentary assistants and other researchers. I couldn't fail to notice that you haven't mentioned MPs. So my question to you is, how was this received by MPs, especially in the Greek Parliament, which you seem to be more familiar with? So you have seen it evolving through time. And like, did they welcome this new procedure? And mostly, your research, who was it addressed to? Whose benefit were you trying to achieve? Thank you.
Uh, you are welcome. Um, we did invite MPs, and also in Argentina, also MPs came up and took part. You need to know that this sort of workshop, we are talking here about 210 uh, possible applications. So you have a very long list, which you evaluate or you ask the focus group to evaluate um, on two dimensions, priority and relevance of these solutions. So you need some people there to stay for 3.5 or 4 hours within a virtual environment, within a video call, discussing and evaluating 420 points. So you can imagine that this is very comprehensive. So we had also MPs, but as in some cases, like Greece, MPs said that they would appear and they sent their aides finally. So this is not a new thing. So what we wanted to see is the response of the organization and not of a single MP. So we also integrated these responses. We wanted to be them as representative as possible. Of course, it's only a focus group, but it's not possible to do this for hundreds of employees or all MPs. That would be not possible, as I expect. Um, so uh, how so this was about the process. So we did incorporate also input by MPs, but we did not separate it from the others. That's very important methodological point of view. So we did not compare. So what the MPs said, oh, what did the externals say? What did the parliamentary employees say? So for obvious reasons, we did not want to confront this. So we integrated all these answers. We built an average
Do you
for
wish you
each.
had?
No, no, because I mean, I had I had to opt for a completely different methodological approach. For instance, through interviews, to be more to dig into deep. This could be, by the way, a follow-up step. So after you have this prioritization, so how is this uh, accepted? So, and to answer your question, so we did true. We did also the follow-up step. So since we had, you have to imagine, we talk here about a wealth of data, a lot of data. You have priorities and relevance per sector, 9 sectors as mentioned, but also overall throughout all 210, throughout the whole parliament. So you have a lot of diagrams, a lot of information. So, and this was by design, of course. One of the goals was to confront the parliament with these results. And we did this within each one of the parliament. We did internal workshops and discussed this. Of course, here there is there are lots of issues to be taken care of. For instance, our service is a research service. Our output is directed towards towards the Speaker of the Parliament. So whatever we are presenting, it goes throughout a very specific direction. And on the other side, since we are a scientific service, we are also entitled to publish our results openly, since we are paid by public funding. So in this specific situation, we opted for publishing the results as a scientific outcome, but at the same time, internally distributing them to users that have a major role in the organization, so that they can be taken into account in the design of follow-up um, systems and processes. And this is not a publicly, so the interna corporis of the organization is not a public, is not a transparent, is not to be publicly announced. It is a political process, it is an administrative process. So we work on here to complete my answer. We work on two different levels, both internally within the organization to promote these results and make them useful for the organization, for instance, in building an institutional strategy. And on the other hand, since it is public research, publicly funded research, we publish the results for the people to see what we have done. But the prioritization and which ones will be opted of these technologies, this is something that the parliament has to decide. And the decision process in the parliament is a completely different thing that we do not announce or we do not reveal ex post. Oh, sorry, ex ante.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This was really clear. Thank you. And I see another question from the board.
I would like to start from one of the biggest challenges. From an ethical point of view, as a parliaments around the world adopt AI tools, how can they address ethical concern such as bias, accountability, transparency in decision making?
This is probably one of the most difficult questions to be tackled with absolute certainty, since we cannot very easily define a lot of the definitions and the terms that you mentioned in your questions. We start with AI or artificial intelligence. As said, this is not a very well-defined term. What is exactly AI? What does it encompass? What is not AI? What are the framework? What is the framework within parliaments, with the organization, with governance? These are very difficult issues to be defined. And at the same time, you spoke about ethics, accountability, transparency. So the ethical question is a very old one. It goes back to ancient Greek and to ancient Rome as well. And of course, it is very closely related to the societal and maybe geographical also setup of any given country or organization. So what is considered ethical in Europe might not be the same if you compare it with the Chinese environment or the US environment or the Africa or the down under environment. So there's a lot of different nuances there that have to be taken care. But we're not completely lost. Since we are in a union, the European Union, that has a history of trying to regulate all these things, there have been efforts for the past years that led earlier this year to the Artificial Intelligence Act. And also there have been efforts that led also earlier this year. So the AI Act was enforced, I think, on 1st of August, came into force. And maybe in February or April, the Council of Europe brought out a covenants with a very broad but also quite interesting set of definitions and recommendations regarding the use of AI in an ethical and accountable and transparent manner. So if you're a parliament now and having all you need to have all this into your mind before going and attempting any type of intervention. Here I have to say that the Italian parliament is possibly, at least to my own perception, the most advanced in Europe concerning the use of artificial intelligence. It brought out also in early this year, it brought out a list of recommendations for the use of generative AI by parliamentary professionals.
Making us proud here. We're all very proud of that.
Yeah, I think it was possibly the first parliament in the world that did this. Many others followed that. So you're not alone, and at the same time, I mean, you need also to know that the parliament is not, a silo, which is in a certain sense it is in the governance system, but it has certain interfaces to the government, and the judiciary, and so to the other branches of government. And it needs also to take into account potential national strategies, not also only Europeans that we mentioned. You need to take into account, if you're in a parliament, also your national strategies. You cannot simply forget that and operate in an environment where you're all alone. This is not possible. So having said this, so having the 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 European recommendations, having the AI Act enacted, having also some broader principles presented by UNESCO, so by the UN system, but also by the big AI companies that invented the technology. So Google has brought out AI principles. Microsoft has brought AI principles out, and so on. So having all this in mind, your task now as a researcher, or as a politician, or as anybody that wants to introduce this kind of notions, so like ethics, accountability, and so on, into your parliament, you need to start developing your own subset, because you cannot take on board everything. It's not possible. You need to start building an own subset of principles, framework, or maybe guidelines. And for exactly this reason, we talk here about a massive work. I don't think that there are many capable of doing this. And because we identified this need, we sat down with 22 individuals for almost 1.5 years, and we brought out this July the first in the world AI guideline set for parliaments. It is openly accessible. You can find it. You can locate it very easily. Published by the WFD. This is the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. So, and the idea behind this, now, to answer finally your question, is because the environment and the landscape, it's so complex and evolving. Parliaments need guidance, and we offered a superset of 40 guidelines in different sections, so that the parliaments can study them and can cherry pick. So I can do this, I can do that, I can do this from the one section, this from the other section, these two here, and build a subset very quickly to utilize within the own organization.
You have been talking about the Italian Parliament approach, so you should have seen our face super proud. And I would like to restart. How does the Hellenic Parliament's approach to AI compare to the other national parliaments or the European Parliament? Are there
Very careful, very careful.
are there best practices that can be universally applied in your views?
That's a very interesting question. So you need to know something about parliaments, and this is that well, you're studying maybe also parliaments among the other institutions during your studies. So parliaments are traditionally very um, careful organizations. You could call them conservative. Not all are, of course, but I mean the majority. I think they could identify with this term. So um, when you have this new technology, so generative AI, because AI is not new, right? Uh, I mean, I studied this in the 90s in my university. We studied neural networks and fuzzy logic and all this stuff uh, under a completely different perspective, of course. And there were people before us that studied this in the 80s, in the 70s, and the 60s. So it's not something that is completely new. Of course, what makes it really powerful is a combination of things. And it's for instance, I mean, to see the big picture. You might have the algorithms. Some of these algorithms are not new, but you didn't have the processing power. You now have this super strong and powerful processors, graphical processors that were developed for something completely different, and they were found to be absolutely fitting for calculating the sorts of calculations that artificial intelligence algorithms need, which is quite remarkable, as nobody saw that coming, including themselves that invented this technology. So you have NVIDIA, for instance, that became maybe the most important company in the world. So it is ordinary what has happened.
So it's the
And then
processor, it's not the technology.
Yes, but the processor is based this parallel
On tech.
technology that the GPUs used, and we used to have them in our powerful computers for playing games. And it was rather a niche application within a technological system. They became from overnight, well, not overnight, but let's say over a minimal amount of time historically, to be a critical infrastructure, and the US prohibiting them from exporting large amounts of these units because it's considered critical infrastructure and a very important technology. So it's very remarkable what has happened. So you have all this, and at the same time you're a tiny little parliament or a bigger parliament. But I mean, there are very few parliaments that are very big. Most of the parliaments, so that you have the super big ones of the big states, of the big countries, but most are not that big, meaning that their capacity to innovate, to uh, to to invest is very limited, and so you need to cooperate. And when you ask for a tiny or for a medium-sized parliaments, I mean, there are also tiny parliaments in small island states, for instance. So what can you expect from these? Not much. So they will probably have to assimilate technologies that are already out there. Now, when you have a medium-sized parliament, uh, the way we usually operate is we use in Europe we have, of course, guidance a lot by the European Union, and we have the European Parliament that has a lot of capacity and does a lot of investments in this regard. So it is easy for us look guidance upon what colleagues there have done, because simply they have massive units, a lot of funding, and quite interesting ideas that drive progress for parliaments forward. So this is what we do. So mainly, we investigate, we see what's out there, and as a research service, we wrap this all up and present that to the leadership. Uh, Hence the caution. We are cautious. But indeed, we have done planning, and indeed, we have AI systems in place that are operable. So it's not like we're not involved at all. I think we follow the general trends with a cautious approach, which I don't think it's wrong at all. It is a very powerful technology. Parliaments, I mean, we operate also under the old regime, under our usual regime. It's not like we stopped working and we're waiting for the new technology to save us. No, we continue to operate as we did always. And parliaments are very efficient organizations because we are around for hundreds of years, some of us. So, uh, but when we have such a new technology that has a perspective of changing everything within the organization, you better be cautious. And hence, to make the link also to the previous question, and hence the development of these guidelines for parliaments that do not have the capacity, and most of them are like this, to study these guidelines, to assess them, and to see which ones can be used for the specific individual occasion, because every parliament is different, every country is different. So, okay, cooperation is okay, but in the end, the institution needs to define the proper framework, technologies for itself. It cannot rely to foreign practice solely.
So just wrapping up for our listeners, your view is that the best practices that can be universally applied when parliaments decide to use AI tools is caution in developing them, in regulating them, and in setting the right ethical and transparency boundaries before implementing them just because it's the trend of the moment. Your point is that
Exactly.
AI has been around for so long, and just because it's made possible by technology right now, it doesn't mean that everyone has to implement AI tools if they're not ready for it. Is this correct?
Yeah, well, it's quite correct. I mean, uh, it is a trend for a reason, right? It is a trend because it makes a lot of processes more efficient. It makes a lot of processes more quicker. And it also makes things possible that previously there weren't. There weren't. So, but at the same time, you have a functional organization, so it works. Um, and and you have the possibility of making it work better, more efficient and quicker, with less money, with less funding, which is very important. But this will happen. I don't think that we will the application of these kind of technologies is we'll have to stop them or so. That would be crazy. I think it is inevitable that organizations will evolve using these kind of technologies, whether this is generative AI, blockchain, or whatever. What we are saying is about we need a structured process to integrate these processes, these technologies, in a cautious, responsible, and yes, ethical manner. And you can add here any adjectives you like. I mean, inclusive and so on. But you need to do this with an educated approach. Not let's get this technology in, and we'll see what happens. That's not the way forward.
Thank you, Dr. Fitsilis. A very healthy hinge of cautiousness and, of course, of care for how new things are implemented is what we definitely needed to hear. And I am sure that our listeners will be happy to hear this interview with you. And just to make sure that we say goodbye in the proper way, would you perhaps have some suggestions regarding books, podcasts, TV series, anything that comes up to your mind that may help our listeners to be introduced into this kind of ethical approach to the introduction of AI tools and new IT measures into parliamentary procedures?
Well, for your listeners that understand Greek, we have done. I was very happy to co-produce with a series of colleagues here in the Hellenic Parliament, a Hellenic Parliament television production. We did a couple of documentaries, or better said, a couple of discussions, panel discussions, which are online on YouTube. I think there's automated translation. You can follow that. But I would say simply, since I mentioned this just a few questions earlier, we are public researchers, and since we do publicly funded research, we are publishing most of the work that we do, and a lot of the work that we do, we are taking steps that we do it as openly accessible as possible. So you will find our work like the guidelines I mentioned earlier, or our books that we published in the past years. You will find all this publicly available. Uh, of course, sometimes we cannot escape from using very legalistic or technical language, but I'm sure you will find also parts that are quite understandable and clear to the general public. And finally, we are researchers and we advise the parliament, but at the same time, we are open for communication with the general public. So if your listeners have a specific question, any interesting suggestion, or any thoughts that they think that they would interest us, I would just urge everybody to send us an email to you that can be forwarded to us or directly to us. Our profiles are publicly available, and yes, that would be it.
And we will add the link to our show notes for all of these suggestions and, of course, to your contacts details so that our listeners and ourselves can possibly get in touch with our ideas, questions, doubts, everything. So let me say Efkaristo to you. It was a great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you guys for joining me today to this beautiful episode with Dr. Fotios Fitsilis. Once again, thank you very much and have a lovely Christmas break. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Rosie.
you. Merry Christmas to all. Merry Christmas to all, and have a happy new year.
Thank you, you too.